I want to welcome you all to this very special presentation by Harriet Goldin. She's a Wellesley resident and she's founder and president of the Goldin Foundation for Excellence in Education. Harriet's one of those amazing individuals who's made a real difference to our society. In her case, in the field of education, and by extension to the welfare of children, areas that I know are of great importance to all of us. In 1990, she founded the Goldin Foundation to honor unsung heroes in education and to recognize outstanding teachers, schools, and communities. Since 2016, through its Exemplary Projects Awards, the Foundation has widened its scope to search nationwide for projects that are innovative, successful, and that have the potential to serve as models for other communities across the country. In 2018, for example, the award went to the Tutoring Institute of Arts program in upstate New York for its cultural outreach to the community. And this year, to a school district in Houston, Texas, for its new Arrival Center that supports students from other parts of the world, often non-English speakers, who are totally unfamiliar with American culture and with schools. Harriet's own teaching experience began in 1962, when, after graduating from the University of Pennsylvania, she became an elementary school teacher. Since then, she has taught classes from kindergarten through college. She's also been an educational administrator, and she continues to consult. Her last formal position was Director of Career and Instructional Development for a collaborative of 14 school systems in the MetroWest Boston area. Now, Harriet has agreed to facilitate a conversation about the role of personal philanthropy and some of the programs her foundation has supported. Harriet's been a hands-on president, visiting schools, assessing programs, identifying and advocating for new ideas and for positive approaches. She therefore has an unmatched perspective on current educational practices and successful innovation. We're really thrilled she's going to share her insights with us this morning. So please join me in welcoming Harriet Goldin.
Good morning. I think I gave Jillian a two very short paragraph description.
Yeah, very modest, very modest.
So thank you very much, Jillian. So I'd like to share with you a personal approach to philanthropy, but I would like to engage you in the discussion. So the format for today, and the reason why we have us sitting in a circle, or more of an oval, and we can move in, is to share and learn from one another. This is the way I would run a typical classroom. This is the way I would engage people in discussion and looking about what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it. And so I hope that you will participate. So the plan is I will give just a tiny little bit of background, and let's talk a little bit about philanthropy. Then I will get into my own personal vision and action and passion about it. Have you share yours, and then go into a little bit of discussion about the Goldin Foundation and some of the other projects that we're involved with. And when I say we're, I'd like to establish as a baseline that I'm very aware of the fact that I grew up in a very comfortable home. There was always food on the table. There were always people around. There was a lot of love. There was a lot of support. There was a lot of education. And even now, I have the support of a loving family who has gotten involved with me in these various endeavors, including my husband, Mickey, and my kids and my grandchildren. So I consider myself very fortunate and very grateful as I have started some of these, I'll call them adventures and adventures. So let's talk a little bit about what is philanthropy to you? What does that mean? I mean, there's the dictionary description that says it's the desire to promote the welfare of others, expressed especially by the generous donation of money to good causes. Well, to tell you the truth, I don't like that definition. I think there's a lot more to it. So let's just pass along this microphone, and if you have any thoughts about what does philanthropy mean to you, well, let's sort of start this conversation. And if you like, you can pull your chairs in a little bit so we can be more direct face to face.
You want to hold up your hand?
Are there any takers?
Yes, thank you. I spent quite a bit of time working with inner city kids, even kids who were in the Job Corps, and help them develop career plans and successful paths in their life. And what I found out is that they could not identify with those as real goals. They had no family experience, no neighborhood experience. So you were met with the challenge of having to impact the inside way a person's mind works. And it's not easy. It is not an easy thing to do, to change somebody's idea about who he could be, who she could be. And that's an important part of philanthropy, because when we try and help people, it's not just money, it's not just time, it's helping them see themselves in a much more positive way.
I would enlarge on your definition of philanthropy to include donating time and ideas, and I would include corporate philanthropy at the same time. I was involved, I don't know if you were teaching in the Philadelphia area after the University of Pennsylvania, but in the mid-60s, a group of us got together and launched a program to try and cut down on high school dropouts in the inner city. And in so doing, we got a number of corporations in the Philadelphia market to participate. And we got kids that were sophomores in high school who were judged to be sure dropouts, and we gave them work after school. They would go to one of 5 corporations for 4 hours, and they would spend 2 hours doing work, whether it be sorting mail or delivering mail or, you know, some low skill activity, and then 2 hours learning about the business in that particular company. As a result,
I'm going to hold you here because you can finish this last thought, because we're going to come back to some of these projects a little later.
okay.
But I'm trying to get a definition and how you feel about philanthropy.
Of the first 36 kids who we picked up, 34 of them ended up graduating from high school, and 33 of them going on to college.
Great. I think this is the one that needs to be passed.
I don't think you need money to be a philanthropist. I think that if you can give your time to help people in whatever endeavor, that's even more important in some ways than giving money, because a lot of people don't have the money to give.
Well, purpose of philanthropy, I think, originated to fill the gap that government was not filling. And in earlier times, that was filled to some extent by religious organizations. They created things like orphanages and provision for the poor. And throughout the ages, I think you find that philanthropies come into existence when individuals see that there's a gap in terms of provision for some aspect of society, and that's how it originated.
Anybody else?
Since we've sort of gotten away from the idea of philanthropy just being donating money, but time being the huge, huge issue, I happened to attend a religious service over at Wellesley College yesterday, and what I loved about the homily and the whole approach of the service was a great deal of diversity in all of the girls who were there and who attend Wellesley College. But they really tried to inculcate the idea, there is a privilege. You are all privileged to be here on this college campus. And therefore, you owe, the talk about giving back and handing back. There was a lot of discussion about where they might go from there. Several of the girls brought up things like Greta and the climate change, and they had all been on marches for climate change and so on. And all of those things, there's so much out there to do and to be part of that he kept suggesting every one of you will find a niche where you can go out and be a significant part of the world you live in.
Thank you for saying that. That echoes my sentiment in terms of always feeling that I wanted to make this world a little bit better than when I first entered it. And if I could make a positive change while I was alive and create something that I would call a living legacy, something that could continue beyond the time that I was on this earth, then that would be a valuable contribution. So many of you are already involved in doing fine work as volunteers. And so this is not a judgment on who's got the best project or what you're doing. It's just your intent, your vision, your passion, and then your action. And I think that those are three really important components of doing philanthropic work as my definition. People have different definitions, and I actually think that yours, in talking about recognizing a need, and one that the government doesn't necessarily support, is one very viable way to do something. So in talking about a vision, a passion, and a role, I think these have to be integrated. So I've sort of told you what my vision is about giving back while I'm alive. My passion has always been about helping children reach their potential to be productive, informed citizens. And one way to do this is to recognize the people behind them in the schools who are empowering them to reach their full potential. So in terms of action, that was the goal, that was the vision that I had in starting the foundation, that we would recognize educators who are truly making a difference in the lives of children and validate them. Very often they get a bad rap. Education is often on the front page as being needy, as, too much emphasis on tests, too much, issues about wages. But in the trenches, there are these wonderful, I call them unsung heroes, who are day in and day out creating opportunities for kids. So a little history to tell you about the foundation. I was working in an industry at the time, but I was still consulting as an educator. And I was hearing all kinds of things, this goes back in the late 80s, that schools were cutting back their budgets. The enrichment courses were going. Art and music were no longer included. There was a morale problem. Teachers were being riffed and not being given the opportunity to stay. Really good teachers. It didn't necessarily mean that, they had 3 years experience, but they were gone. So this was a way to encourage teachers to, number one, stay on, to possibly recruit new teachers into the profession. And I'd like to share with you the blurb that was on the brochure in the very beginning to give you an idea of really what we were after. I took this idea and worked it with some of the educators with whom I had a lot of for whom I had a lot of respect. And they formed actually my advisory board. And throughout the years, I've worked with wonderful educators and I'll call it in a sort of lean, mean way, because nobody was paid. It was all volunteer effort. The people on my advisory board were all award recipients and knew the value of recognition. So here's the blurb that went on the brochure. Educators play significant roles in developing flexibility, adaptation, and innovation needed to sustain our democratic society. They are in a unique position to help young people explore their full range of potential. Educators teach more than skills. They instill values and encourage children to be creative, curious, caring, and sensitive individuals. The Goldin Foundation for Excellence in Education recognizes and rewards those educators who have made outstanding contributions in their classrooms, schools, and communities. The foundation strives to foster the respect for and appreciation of educators. It also seeks to retain quality education and attract others to the profession. So this was the beginnings of the foundation. And since I had a cohort of school districts in this general area, 15 of them, because I was involved with the collaborative as Director of Career and Educational Administration, that was the place where we got started. And it was a pure nomination experience where outstanding people who really had an impact on children, and there was a whole list of criteria to go by, could be nominated. They could be teachers, they could be administrators, they could be nurses, they could be reading specialists, they could be counselors, they could be art specialists. At one point, we even had somebody who was acting as a go-between kids and faculty, because he was the guy who was out at recess listening to the kids and working with them. So people who would be recognized by their cohorts, their peers, submitted nomination packets. We had a chance to look at them and make our suggestions, and then we made 6 awards every year. The notion of validation was so strong, and people felt so good, that when it came time to share some of their projects, we did this at what we called an educators forum. And so every spring, these 6 educators would be recognized, and one of the host schools would have this wonderful dessert reception, and each of these 6 people would be introduced and have a chance to talk about their experiences and their visions and their projects. So one really important aspect of this was the sharing concept. So just the way that we are going to be sharing some more of these projects today, that's what we did with education. In addition, it was such a hands-on experience that I had a chance to visit every award recipient and spend time with them in their particular setting. And for many of them, this was a first experience of having somebody really take a look, somebody other than someone who was making judgment calls on how they were, getting each kid to respond. So not giving grades, but just listening and participating and having a follow-up conversation. Then all of these educators became part of what we call an educators network. Information was put on a website and then shared with districts, as it turns out, across the country. Because after this successful project went on, we replicated it. We replicated it in Texas, we replicated it in California. And by the time this was really up and going, we had something like 80 to 85 school districts participating in a number of states, 24 recipients every year, 4 educator forums, 4 advisory boards, and it was very well received. And the monies were not great. I want to make that clear. The monies were not great. It didn't take much for an educator to take her small amount, but the mere fact that she or he was recognized by the district and by the community at large meant everything. And so there was this huge ripple effect. It impacted them, it impacted their school communities. Sometimes we would have whole schools or whole grades show up at these educator forums to acknowledge an individual. And so on it went. And it went on like that for many, many years. And we continued to get a lot of very favorable responses. Well, we moved on a little bit, and we tweaked the program because I'm getting a little older. And I was doing a lot of traveling and a lot of meeting with different educators and all of the follow-up and all of these big events that we were running. And so in 2016, we established what we called Exemplary Projects. Projects that have the potential of being replicated or adapted in some way. And so now, if you would go to our website, you would see probably close to 20 of these that have been given. The awards are larger. I go out to visit them. It gets me, as a senior, keeping my mind very active, giving me a chance to meet all kinds of new people, giving me a chance to see what's happening in our schools. So I'm going to stop here for a minute. I will go into, some examples of the some of the exemplary projects. But before that, I wanted to know if anyone wanted to share. We had a little bit of sharing of some projects that people were doing, but I'd like to hear a little bit more. And I think we all would, about things that people are doing that don't necessarily involve big strategic plans, but involve some kind of volunteer work.
Hi, I work for a nonprofit, tutoring dyslexic children, and I was an educator originally, moved on corporate, and then loved working with kids. So I just give of my time, and I'm certified to do this. And the success rate is so great that it's encouraged me to take this on to handle more private students. And these are a lot of times families don't have resources, and these kids are so smart and have so much potential, and to see them develop their potential and graduate and even go on to college is really satisfying for me.
Pass it to somebody else. Joan, tell us a little bit about your project. Well, we have another one.
Where am I going?
That's fine.
Am I on? One of the programs that I was involved in had to do with having like high school level kids compete with ideas that could be funded if they were successful in coming through with ideas to improve, to solve problems in the business they were in, or solve problems with the schools they were in. It was kind of like, and we had teams of kids, 4, 5, or 6 kids who worked together to dream about how do we solve this problem, and then they made a presentation, and it was voted on by the whole array of teams that were together. And it was such a fantastic experience because the kids learned how to think and express what they concluded. We never knew how hard it was for kids to speak, so we had to teach them to stand up in front of a group and say what's on their mind and say what the conclusions are. So it was the most effective hands-on approach, having to do with idea competition, presenting your ideas and solutions, and then getting a financial award to carry it through. And it was a very effective program, and the kids were shy. They weren't sure they were able to do it. And so we had to figure out ways to say to a kid, you have to do it. If you want to win, you got to do it. So it worked.
Can you talk about Family Promise?
Just a little bit. Family Promise it's MetroWest Family Promise in Natick. And it started in a one-room basement of a church, and homeless families could come there for a period of time. They didn't actually stay there. All the churches in the area and synagogues would take them for a week at a time for dinner and overnight, then put them on the bus and bring them back to the church. Well, it got to be quite, they were doing such a good job that they actually did a fundraiser and now are in a much better facility of their own that has actual rooms for the children to play and so on, not just a little dark basement. But the beauty of it is when these families come in, there's qualifications. They can't have drug problems or that kind of thing. They must be willing to be trained to do some type of entry-level job, which in the town of Natick, it's actually a wonderful town for that type of thing, both IT, nails and those kind of spa jobs, but they get them all into some kind of initial job so that they can be responsible, have a job, put a little money aside, and then as they put the money aside, then they're able to move out on their own and go into subsidized housing. Now in the meantime, the Natick school system is wonderful to the students. In fact, I lost my job. I used to tutor for them, but the Natick school system is so good. They did a wonderful after-school program for their homework and all that kind of stuff. The other thing I did was take care of little children when their moms, usually it was moms, sometimes dads, went off to whatever their training level was. So I had some of the most adorable little children. Well, the daycare centers in Natick stepped up to the plate for that. And they take so many little ones free of charge. So that's much better than one old lady, taking care of them. They're in with a group of children, but the town of Natick has been so generously supportive. And the fun for me is to watch when they move out, and then you still stay in touch with them a little bit, and they're off and running and doing their thing, and it's a wonderful program. And somebody said to me, well, it's only 4 or 5 families at a time, that's not much. And I wanted to say, for 4 or 5 families and their children, I think it's a lot. But
Thank you. I think there's probably a lot more going on in this room than's being admitted. I know some of you are working in shelters. Some of you are involved with immigration issues. Some of you are working in food pantries and in your churches and synagogues and giving of your time. Some people have asked me, how do you pay for? Now I'm going to go back to the Goldin Foundation. How do you pay for all of this? Well, we're not in the Bill Gates category, I will tell you that. But we started early on thinking of this as an endowment. And so my husband and I put money in, some family members put a little bit of money in, and over 30 years it has grown. And so we don't even do active fundraising. You will not see a golf tournament. You will not see a bingo night. This is something that we have added to over time, and basically, used some monies that we've gotten from Mickey's photography and my artwork, and just people who want to remember folks who have passed away or getting some kind of special recognition. So it did not take humongous dollars to get involved.
Did you write grants as well?
No, we did not. We did not write grants. We are giving these recognition awards, but we chose not to write grants. And the reason was, I had been involved in a lot of grant writing myself, and I knew what is involved in reporting and having a higher authority making a determination of whether this program should continue or not continue. And even if it was very valued, the money could run out. And 3 years later, that would be the end of it. So we specifically said, let's go this endowment route. And in fact, I'm not going into any great detail. We have set up a number of other endowments, not necessarily as big, but again, they're involved with projects that we feel strongly about and that we hope will continue. One we did with the League of Women Voters in Needham, one we did with the Penn Dental School. So those are examples of things that we are still involved with and feel very committed. And we made some life choices in terms of how we wanted to spend our dollars, and it hasn't stopped us from traveling, but we don't own a boat. we don't have a plane. I don't have all these support people coming to my house, combing my hair and making my food. There was an article in the paper about that today. So it's become just a venture that we've been very much engaged with. So I'd like to tell you about 3 projects, 3 exemplary projects. But before I do, I want to read to you the criteria. I hope they inspire you, and I hope they will inspire some educators, because we've got this network now that there's going to be this big email blast going out in September to all of these various superintendents and assistant superintendents for curriculum and instruction, and now we're doing Facebook, and now we're doing LinkedIn, and it's a way to say, here are some really good tested ideas. We hope maybe even one of them will inspire you and say, this sounds interesting. I might have a population that this addresses. Maybe I can adapt it. And then they can read about it on the website. Each group has its own website page on our homepage. And contact them. And these people have agreed to be listeners and to help out whenever possible. So here are the criteria that we use for these exemplary projects. The tangible project demonstrates excellence in education and has successfully impacted children, students, and/or educators early childhood to grade 12. It used to just be K through 12, and then we found that there were some really important programs going on at the early childhood level. 2, the project exemplifies a creative and innovative approach that has made a difference in a classroom, school, or community. 3, the project evidences developing academic, social, and emotional growth of young people, respecting individual needs and talents, fostering self-esteem, and encouraging realization of full potential. 4, the project fosters and evidences a community of teachers and learners. 5, the project encourages and evidences civic awareness and engagement. 6, the project has been implemented for a minimum of 3 full years. The reason being, if a new program is starting, we want to give a chance for it to be tweaked and make adjustments, just as we had to do with our own foundation. The project has potential for replication and/or adaptation in some way. And lastly, the project, once awarded, will provide a description, contact person, and website link to be shared on the Goldin Foundation for Excellence in Education website. So, if any of you were interested further, it's an easy thing to remember because it's Goldin. Goldin with an I, goldinfoundation.org. And on the sidebar, you'll see exemplary projects. So I'm going to briefly share a local project, a project nationwide, and an international project. So the first one is in a nearby community, Needham. Needham has a garden club. There are many garden clubs. And this garden club took the idea of Art in Bloom at the MFA, which is so well attended by people. People love it, which really matches individual artwork with flower arrangements from around the state. But what this garden club did was to develop a collaboration with the high school art department. So what they were doing is taking students' artwork. It could be a visual representation, it could be sculpture, it could be in digital, some kind of a digital artwork. And then they assigned their members to complement each piece. And every March, I think it's 10 years now, 10, 11 years, they have this big community celebration of showing this pairing, this intergenerational experience, which is now enlarged to include the whole community, of validating these kids who are not necessarily your sports jocks. These are your artists. And then introducing the community also to the notion of flower arranging as a valuable art form. So that's an example of one. And we've actually had a number of calls from different communities around the country saying, I'd like some more information about that project. This looks like something we could do. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second. Are there any questions? Okay. The program that is a little bit more national is one in Washington, D.C. When I say national, it means it's not in Massachusetts. It's somewhere else. And it's called Reach Incorporated. So Washington is just not filled with senators and representatives and all the fancy houses that they live in and all of the related activity. there's some very, very needy sections in Washington, D.C. And in one of these neediest sections, there was I think he was a sociologist to begin with, got the idea that he would like to work with high school students who were years below in reading proficiency, give them the tools and the experience to boost their own levels of proficiency by working with kids who were in the elementary schools. So it became a tutor program. It has now grown from a couple of schools. I've lost track of how many kids are involved. So it's such a win-win situation. You can imagine the little kids in 3rd or 4th grade having this sort of big hunk of a kid coming in, looking up to this kid and who's giving them instruction in reading and language development. It's quite amazing. Meanwhile, the high school kids are going to class twice a week. They get a stipend. They're going to class twice a week, learning their own reading skills, having a summer program that helps them become even more proficient. And then, as sort of the topper, these kids write books using language and experiences that the younger kids are having, so that the books become very meaningful and the language becomes very meaningful, and it's just a win-win for everybody. So this is a program that we feel really strongly about circulating because it has such potential. The last program that I want to mention is Kids for Peace. So Kids for Peace is an international program. There's a local chapter, Kids for Peace Boston. It originally started in Israel, and it has now spread to other countries and other locations in the U.S. And what it does is bring together children of the 3 Abrahamic faiths: Christianity, Muslim, and Jewish, to be together, to learn from one another, and learn how to be peace leaders. So this starts in 7th grade. These kids start meeting. There's targeted classes as to what they do every month. They get involved in social action projects. They learn about each other's holidays, cultures, religions. Even during the session, there might be a timeout, so a Muslim child can do his worship. So there's this genuine respect that's built up, and this convergence of ideas that is quite wonderful. I visited the program in Israel as well, besides working with the kids in Boston. And just imagine, the office is in East Jerusalem, and you've got Palestinian kids from the West Bank, along with Arabs and Jews and Christians from Israel, all coming together. And even their parents have sessions together. So that's another wonderful aspect to this program. And so that this becomes a model for how kids of different backgrounds and needs can get together. So a school district, for example, could say, gee, I could do this, not necessarily with the 3 religions, but I could do this with 3 different groups as a way to inform kids about, you could get the political group in, you could get the LG, on and on, okay? people of different aspects getting together to work together on common problems. So this is another example of what we have done. Is there anybody else who would like to share another project? I can take it this way. You're going to have to pass this one down.
I should start with the fact that I'm basically a retired social worker, so that you'll know from whence I come. But one of the groups that really, I think, needs some more attention is us, meaning seniors. This is the first time in history that we have so many women, for example, 50 and over, because people are not women are not dying from childbirth as they had before, so that the census indicates that we have an enormous amount, particularly of women 50 and older. And I think that this constitutes a part of society that really needs some more help, but doesn't really get it. Because a lot of women, as they turn older, don't quite know how to deal with being a senior, because our culture has not really prepared people for that. All of us now, 50 and over, probably had grandparents, if we were lucky, that lived beyond a certain point, but they're not culturally able to be mentors to us in terms of our experience with them. I can remember my own grandparents and my grandmother in her house dress, and always preparing food for us, and wearing the particular shoes that women wore. I mean, it was a particular kind of lifestyle. And so there's no modeling really for people who are getting older in our culture at this point. And that's most of us sitting here, actually. And I don't know what experiences people have that they might want to talk about. But since my background is social work, I really have seen that this is a part of society that's not getting very much attention these days.
What is your name?
I'm Adele Sobel.
So, if there's anyone interested in meeting with Gail to perhaps brainstorm ideas about what she's interested. I mean, we have a lot of models now that are addressing seniors. One is what's happening in this very space. But there are some really interesting things, and if you have any specific needs, that might be a good chance to connect and see if you can come up with some ideas. Creative problem solving, critical thinking, these are all things that we can still do as adults. I don't know about you, but I'm so excited by what I see with these young kids and this climate action. Somebody was doing the right thing for them, in terms of their background, to give them the wherewithal to just go out and plug ahead and do some of their programming. It took a lot to put that program together all over the world. This was just not a convenient, let's get together in March idea. This took a lot of sophisticated planning and coordination. Mm-hmm. I'd like to share with you just two more things. One, I'll call it a little giveaway project. It's something that I had read about in a book by Charlie Collier, who is Linda Kennerson's brother. And Charlie came up with this notion of family giving. And it was such a neat idea that we instituted it within our family every year. That's probably now about 8 years. So the idea is that Mickey and I had a sum that we would give to charity. But instead of us making the decision, we had the whole family participate, including the grandkids, which means that every Thanksgiving when we would get together, people would come with their ideas. Now, you have to imagine a 7-year-old saying, I think this is a really good idea, Mom, and I need to use the internet to get this information on a piece of paper so that everybody can understand what I'm suggesting. And so they bring these ideas, they have to present them to the group, and then the group decides which they would like to sponsor. And so typically every year, this is not a foundation, it's just the Goldin Family Fund that we have set up with Fidelity. And the whole family makes a determination. And the kids especially. You know, it's just wonderful, wonderful to see how everybody has become involved with this. And it's basically an easy thing to do, and I'm happy to talk with anybody afterwards if they would like to do this.
May I just wonder whether there anybody in the group wants to speak to the whole issue of being a senior in our culture at this point and how it affects us, which I think rather than talking about philanthropies, we ought to talk about basic relationships. I think people who are 50 and over are really lonely, and I think there's not enough in our culture to keep them stimulated or feeling relating to someone. And so I just wondered about that issue, if anyone wants to address it.
Go ahead.
Yes, well, I've never used one of these, but I just thought I'd mention it because there are, and then of course we have the COA in town that also provides a lot of things for people to do. And by doing things, you meet people that are friends. I think you make friends. You make, in Wellesley Neighbors, the idea is we're neighbors because we're creating a virtual neighborhood so that we can say, do you want to go to a movie, or can you lend me a cup of flour, or whatever.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I'd like to close with some reflections that I made at one of our educator forums way back in 2005. The educator forums is where we would celebrate the teachers and whomever was being awarded that year. And it was also a chance for me to get up and talk about some ideas that I had. So this was some comments that were created because I was so inspired by my granddaughter's first birthday and what she was about to become and what she was doing, I wrote this up. I think of all the people in Julia's life who will affect her every day. Her parents and grandparents will foster her inquisitiveness and creativity as they continue to provide numerous opportunities for exploration and discovery. And of course, there are so many others who will come into her life and leave a little bit of themselves with her. A few of the examples of the myriad of people who impact our children. You can see where I'm going and what my passion is. I think of the many stories of people who give an account of the special teacher or mentor who was so influential in touching the lives of young people, some who may not have so many advantages. I think of the classroom teachers who challenge their students to go beyond simply recalling facts to thinking critically and creatively. And despite the pressure of getting all formal curriculum covered, are able to share some of their own passions and experiences of learning. And I regard highly the efforts of teachers, administrators, parents, and others who work together for advancing not only the knowledge base, but the continuity of community in our schools. Raising, teaching, and nurturing children become a shared responsibility of all of us. It really does take a village. Walt Whitman expresses the influence of the community at large in his mid-19th century poem, a child went forth. And I'm just going to note some excerpts. There was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon, that object he became. And that object became part of him for that day, or a certain part of that day, for many years, or stretching cycles of years. Whitman eloquently describes the various influences, flowers, birds, barnyard animals, that became part of the child. He speaks of the changes of city life, the beauty of landscape. He talks about affection and discoveries of what is real and unreal, and doubts and curiosity. He described the schoolmistress and the friendly boys and quarrelsome boys, the tidy and fresh-cheeked girls and the loving parents who give this child more themselves than that. They all became part of the child who went forth every day and who now goes and will always go forth every day. That particular year, we gave awards to people who had many different areas of expertise. They include a classroom teacher, administrator, specialists, nurses, a secretary, a parent community volunteer, and a band director, among others. So it's with delight, enthusiasm, and admiration that we recognize these educators, and I thank you all for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences with you, and I'm happy to answer questions. I think you have one.
My willingness to donate to charitable causes received a serious blow some years ago when I was made aware of the expenses connected with fundraising as part of the charities and some other things that were not part of the mission of that organization. And so if you want to tell us something about how we can satisfy ourselves that this particular charity is a worthy cause. Because, for instance, the case that was put before me was somebody who worked for a cancer organization. Sounds like a really great thing. He told me that one of the things that they would do in their mailing letters, they would say, all right, you should donate for these reasons, and here are 7 signs that you may have some kind of cancer. The organization then said that that fundraising letter, which was an expensive part of their work, was part of their educational effort. And I was really astonished at an organization like that resorting to something like that. So hiding these administration expenses was really troubling.
So there are a number of sites that you can go to check out some of these charities. And they say that if a charity is spending 10% or less on administration, that it's considered a worthwhile charity. Anything that gets over that amount, that's the kind of barrage that you get in the mail all the time. I shouldn't say that globally, but there is something called the charity Navigator. I'm not sure if I have that term exactly right, but you can Google charity Navigator or charity locator or trying to decide which charity to give, and they give a full account of the charities that you might be interested in and what and how they spend their money. By law, they have to. Anyone who's considered a nonprofit organization has to submit an annual report, and that is available for anyone to see. That lists just what you described. So Charity Navigator. Yes?
I loved your idea of family giving, and I wondered if you had any more information on it on the website.
I don't, but I'm happy to chat with you afterwards. That's the website that we really focus on. Of all of the things that we've been involved with, the big one is the Goldin Foundation. Okay, I thank you so much for coming and for letting us have this very unusual setup today. Just give us a chance to share some wonderful ideas with one another. Thanks.